Once upon a time, castles were full of life, bustle and noise, and crowded with lords, knights, servants, soldiers, and entertainers. From fairy tale to Disney themes, living in castle is said to be objectively romantic. Castles have fascinated many history buffs and those interested in architecture. They are marvels of medieval times. Despite their mythological status, it might be surprising to learn that castles were often dark, drafty. Keep watching to know more about castles and the life within it. A castle is a type of fortified structure built during the Middle Ages, predominantly by the nobility or royalty and by military orders. Scholars debate the scope of word castle, but usually consider it to be the private fortified residence of a lord or noble. This is distinct from a palace, which is not fortified, from a fortress, which was not always a residence for royalty or nobility, and from a fortified settlement, which was a public defense. Though there are many similarities among these types of construction. Usage of the term has varied over time and has been applied to structures as diverse as hill forts and country houses. Over the approximately 900 years, the castles were built. They took on a great many forms with many different features. Although some, such as curtain walls, arrow slits, and portcullises, were commonplace. European-style castles originated in the 9th and 10th centuries. After the fall of the Carolingian Empire resulted in its territory being divided among individual lords and princes. These nobles built castles to control the area immediately surrounding them, and the castles were both offensive and defensive structures. They provided a base from which raids could be launched as well as offered protection from enemies. Although their military origins are often emphasized in castle studies, the structures are also served as centers of administration and symbols of power. Urban castles were used to control the local populace and important travel routes. And rural castles were often situated near features that were integral to life in the community, such as mills, fertile land, or water source. Many northern European castles were originally built from earth and timber, but had their defenses replaced later by stone. Early castles often exploited natural defenses, lacking features such as towers and arrow slits, and relying on a central keep. In the late 12th and early 13th centuries, a scientific approach to castle defense emerged. This led to the proliferation of towers, with an emphasis on flanking fire. The most important person in a castle was the owner, the king, lord, knight, or lady. But they did not live there all the time. Kings of England owned dozens of castles and could never have visited them all. Castle owners always had private apartments, or at least a bedroom with an ensuite loo and a chamber where they welcomed visitors. There were often a private chapel too. These were usually in the safest part of the castle, and only trusted servants or honored guests were allowed in. Don't be tempted to over-romanticize the unpleasant realities of life in a medieval castle. To our modern standards of living, most medieval castles would have been incredibly cold, cramped, totally lacking privacy, and would have been disgustingly smelly, and likely the home to more than a fair share of rats. Life in a medieval castle could have been full of pomp and ceremony for the owners and superiors, but also very cold and smelly for the ordinary servants. Lowlier servants slept anywhere within the castle they could find, and in summer started to work at 5:30 a.m., continuing until about 7 p.m. They had a few days off and little pay, but were given uniforms called liveries in their lord's colors and regular meals all year round. Even the lord's leftovers were much tastier than peasant food. so being a castle servant was a sought-after job. Firstly, why were these castles so dark and cold? Well, most medieval castles were made of stone. Although stone was a perfect material for creating strong defensive fortifications, medieval building techniques were basic. This meant the most structures could only support tiny windows, which resulted in dark rooms that were constantly cold, as the thick stone could never be fully warmed by the sun. Late medieval development in architecture and Gothic castle designs did improve on these problems though, and castles built in the late 1200s began to have larger windows and lighter rooms. Incredibly, fireplaces weren't invented until the middle of the medieval period. Until this time, all fires were open fires, which did not spread heat so effectively and generated a lot of smoke. The invention of the fireplace made rooms warmer as it heated the stones as well as the chamber itself. This made life in medieval castle much more bearable. When it came to sanitation, though things were always truly disgusting, the link between sewerage and disease weren't made until the 18th century. And medieval people remained blissfully ignorant about the health consequences of poor toilet hygiene. Resultantly, most toilets or garderobes were nothing more than small antechambers in which you'll find a bench with a hole in it. The air contents of the toilet would simply fall, usually from a great height, into a cesspool, or a cesspit, or even into the moat. The contents were often made to overhang an outside wall. As the moat was generally stagnant water, it meant that the stench would have been unbearable, especially in the summertime. In addition to the lack of hygiene with the garderobe, there would have been a huge lack of privacy too. Medieval societies did not really value privacy as we do. So most garderobes would have been a long line of benches with nothing to separate you from your neighbor as he went about his business. Still, I guess it meant that you always had someone to chat with when you were in the toilet. Though medieval people did not know about germs, they believed that bad smells caused illness. Pongs were strongest in early castles, where the poo fell into a cesspit under the keep and the stink rose up through the rooms. So pits sometimes had to be cleaned out by an unfortunate servant called the gong farmer, and everyone would move out while this was happening. The gong farmer would shovel the poo into baskets and wheelbarrows and take it off to bury, or spread on fields as fertilizer. Gong farming could be dangerous as well as smelly. In 1325, Richard the Raker fell into a cesspit and drowned. So gong farmers were quite well paid, but people did not get too close to them. Coming to the floors, they were real garbage heaps with dirt and animal poops. To keep with the stink, herbs were used, which would probably absorb some strain and reduce the stink. Changing the rugs weren't easy as they would reveal even more nasty things. Basically, wherever you walk on a castle, you were walking on a pile of badly concealed filth. Despite what pop culture might have you believe, living in a medieval castle wasn't all that glamorous. So life in a castle was pretty much bad experience unless you were wealthy.